Hi, and welcome to the Team Deacons podcast. This podcast is a dialogue between Roger and James Deacons, joined by Matt Wyman, starting from a submitted question and ending who knows where. We're also joined by guests on occasion. If you'd like to submit a question, please do so by emailing pod@rogerdeacons.com. Today, our discussion starts on a question that came from the website. This is actually, I will admit, the second time we're recording this because I forgot to hit the record button the first time. So
it was rubbish anyway.
So here we go. We've been asked how best a student or a cinematographer starting out can learn the basics of lighting.
Okay, it's a difficult question, isn't it? Because what is your first reaction to that question is, okay, technically, how do you learn to light? And then you think about traditional lighting. And I think a lot of people still look at lighting in this way, which was front light, key light, backlight, fill light, kicker light, but that's not really the essence of lighting. That's the way of creating an image that you have in your head. So it's the image that you have in your head that's more important than the technique, if that makes sense. So I think the only way you really learn lighting is by experiencing light and life and the possibilities and the variations and the nuance of what light does, really.
Basically, looking around and just what you're seeing, where is the light coming from? What is it doing? How am I reacting to the light? Because I think it's important that you know what you like and what you don't like, or what to you portrays anxiety or whatever.
I remember when I was a kid, I used to spend a lot of my time fishing. And, when you're fishing, you're watching a float or you're just staring at the weather, you watch the dawn come up, you watch the clouds come in, you watch the changes of the sun on the ocean, that you look at the different quality of light on a cloudy day and a sunny day and a patchwork cloud day, and the wind coming in and the way it reflects on the water when the water's rough or calm or mirror calm, or, I wouldn't say everybody should go fishing to learn what light does, but, it's looking around, it's being aware of those things, the different, and as you say, the different, some days would feel ominous and some days would feel sparkling, and it wasn't just my mood, it was just created by that kind of the light, the feel of the light. It's how that works on your mind. So I think to really understand light and be able to light, you have to understand how it makes you feel.
And I think that because we all have phones with cameras in it, so we always have a camera with us, it's a good idea to take pictures in different lighting situations and come back and look at them and sort of study them. And
I think, iPhones, whatever, small digital cameras, what an asset. I remember when I was at art college, we did exactly that, but we did it with film cameras. We did black and white. We would go on off, as students, we would take photographs that meant something to us, I suppose, things that interested us. We would print them in the dark room, and then we would go into a room and put them all on the wall. And, a photographer who was one of our tutors, actually Roger Main was one of our tutors at that point, who's a great street photographer. And then we would discuss these photographs. Well, that took a lot of time. That was a lot of process. But the idea now that you can just, take them on your iPhone, study them. Oh, I don't like that. I like that. Let's experiment more a bit in that direction. You've got so many more options now.
But it's also important to know how you respond to light, not...
Yeah. Well, that's what I'm saying, really, about the nature of light on a day-to-day basis. When I was fishing, just the different moods that are created by light and wind and nature. But just looking around here and the different kinds of light that I see just within this room and outside the window, and the hard sunlight and the way it's bouncing and the different moods within 180-degree span of this room, you know?
And once you've been doing this, you can also at home just take a regular lamp and a practical lamp and move it around and take pictures and see what the changes are by the direction of the light, by how much light you put on and all of that.
Yeah, just taking again, it's more difficult when you had to do things on film, but you can still just use your eyes. You don't have to take a picture. The idea of just having a bare bulb. I mean, anybody can have a bare bulb. You can have a practical lamp, take the shade off, and just use the bare bulb, and then get different kinds of diffusions or different kinds of materials to put in front of it, and just, yes, as you say, move it around with somebody, a friend, something sitting in a chair in front of you. Move it around, see what that light does. You can bounce it. You can black one side of the bulb and use the other side to bounce off some material. So, you know, it's not going to necessarily give you a lot of light unless you've got a very bright bulb, but it doesn't matter. It's just you're looking at the quality of that light on a face or on an object.
And I would think it would be interesting to use different kinds of bouncing, tin foil or like a white cloth, because one's softer than the other one.
Yeah, no, exactly. You know, I used to go down a haberdashery and get all sorts of materials, like, you know, sometimes I got a whole roll downstairs, I think, still from a sequin dress kind of material, and some silver material for, again, dress material. And
I'm sure the people in the store thought you were weird. Quite weird.
I'd get material of different colored cloths, you know. So, I mean, I usually, most of my time, I use a white bounce or a warm unbleached muslin or something like that. But you know, I did a lot of films in Africa, and I had all this sort of orange material. I'd have blue material that would reflect the blue of the sky, you know, or kind of complement the blue of the sky. So I used to have a whole range of materials of different colors and different qualities. And yeah, I mean, to experiment, all you need is, say, a bare bulb and just bounce the light off it and yeah, just play. But I think the other thing to do is to look at other work. Obviously, look at paintings, but I mean, look at photographers' work, not necessarily cinematographers' work, still photographers' work, and just look at the personality and the difference between, you know, individuals' work and the sense of them behind their pictures. Look at the difference between somebody like Alex Webb and the way they use light and color, compared with, I don't know, Brassai or somebody who's using black and white, you know.
And not as a way to copy them, but to see what it makes you feel like.
No, I mean, you know, I don't think, no, I certainly couldn't copy Alex Webb if I wanted to, which I do. It would be a very nice thought that you could copy somebody like that. But no, I mean, you look at, I don't know, James Natchway or, you know, Cartier-Bresson or somebody. I mean, you know, there's no way you're going to copy that work because it's very individual. It's personal to them. But what it is to look at it and see that the possibilities, and then find out what you like and what you don't like. What, you know, to develop your own way of seeing, really, which is a pretentious way of saying it, but I don't know any other way of saying it. To develop your eyesight. I just look around the room now and see I like the room. We created a space together and built the house together. But, you know, there's certain sections, the way the light comes in through a window and hits the wall, or that little bit of hot light that bounces up, you know, just little things, you know. Some of the most interesting photographers take photographs of seemingly unimportant objects, you know. William Eccleston, right, was one of the first really great color photographers. And he took loads of pictures of just old buildings and signs and stuff. But there's 4 or 5 pictures he took that are just stunning. There's 2 pictures that are just, one's the back of an old lady's head, and she's sitting on a very green, shiny couch. And it's just the back of her head and her shoulders with this couch. It's amazing. And there's another of a very famous one, because he was photographing mainly in New Mexico. And there's another one of a little kiddie's toy in a yard with a garage door behind it. And it's just the colors and the sense of sadness, of melancholy that he creates just through this image and the light, the harsh sunlight. It's really interesting. So I find, it's quite interesting now. I've got time. It's very interesting just to spend an hour or two just flipping through photographs, images other people have taken. I find it really inspiring.
Well, and like you say, it's important to know what you respond to, because if you go on a set and you're just trying to copy someone, since the situation's not going to be exactly the same as whatever the other scene was that the other person lit, you're going to run into a wall.
Right, but that also kind of implies there's a technique that you can learn.
Yeah.
But there's no such thing as a technique. There's not a rule. There's no such thing as a technique that you can learn. And somebody on the website asks, how do I light this space? Well, what kind of question's that? You could light it in a million different ways. Let's just stick a lamp on top of the lens, on top of the camera, and just punch. I don't know. You could light it a million ways, but what do you want the audience to feel? That's the important thing. What's the script? What's the story? What's the scene? What's the individual shot you're shooting? And what do you want the audience to feel by what you do with the camera? That's what's important, not, key light, fill light, backlight. That's not, yeah.
When you approach a scene that, is coming up and you're thinking, how am I going to light it? You do try and prep in your own mind how to light it, but when we're actually right before shooting it, you end up tweaking it, because when you actually see the people on the stage and all of that.
Yeah, I like to have a plan. I like to have thought things through in my head beforehand, but I also love spontaneity. I don't want to be tied down to something. Obviously, on certain situations, often you have to put a rig up. You have to know
somewhat
basically what you're going to do. Otherwise, you just know where you're going to do some of these things on the day, obviously. But I do like on the day to feel that I'm open to what happens on the set.
Well, I think that's where you find the best things too, because remember the story about Connie Hall in Cold Blood, where he was struggling with the lighting of that scene and struggling and finally said to the production, break for lunch. I need to think. Everybody went off. They turned off all the lights except for a couple of working lights. He came back when there was no one on the set, except for the special effects who were testing the water and the rain in front of the window. And he saw from the work light, just a simple work light, the shadows that were coming in. And he decided, because Robert Blake would be standing by the window, that would be beautiful. And he didn't come in with that idea.
It would feel that Robert Blake was crying, but he wasn't actually crying, because the shadows of the rainwater going down his face would feel like he was crying.
But that's being open.
It is a great story, but he told it to us and he's told it to many people. And we spent a long time actually sitting here at this table having supper and talking about all those things. I think it's a lovely story, but I think he knew exactly what he was doing. I don't think it was he said it was a guy walking past the window with a work light and the effects doing no, he knew what he was doing. I think that was something in his head from beforehand. Personally, I think on that one. But yes, but he was certainly somebody that was open to those kind of what he called happy accidents. Yeah.
Yeah, and a lot of times, especially when you're tired, you tend to want to start overlighting. And so you have to walk away, come back in and turn things off, and then start putting in one or two.
I think I'm like anybody else. I get nervous and I sort of overlight, and I'm tired. I overlight. Because I'm tired and I'm thinking, I better play safe. Am I doing this right? And then I'm overlighting.
How important do you think it is to really know exposure, the basics of exposure and foot candles and all that?
Well, I think it's interesting. I think it's really important to know.
I actually
absolutely. I think it's kind of crucial.
I think it's really important, and even more so now, because a lot of people say, well, we can fix it afterwards, and they can to a degree. But if you shoot it correctly and you know it's going through visual effects, that's really important, because it's kind of like having a thicker negative. You have more latitude to correct what visual effects might do.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's like all the technical considerations of lighting. You need to know it. You need to know it. On the other hand, you shouldn't be a slave to it. When we were shooting film, I know I used to go to the lab, and I was obsessed about printer lights. Mid light was, I think, like 28, something like, or whatever. And often my printer lights would be in the 40s, and they were always a little over, not often under, because I always would give a bit more to a negative. I like that. But and I always thought that I'm going so high. And one day, one of the timers told me again about Conrad Hall. He said, "You don't need to worry." He said he mentioned a particular film that Connie had shot. He said he was going anything from 18, 14, 12 to, well, he said they had to change the level of light going through the printing machine because the negative was so thick. He was printing it equivalent of like a 60 something. I go, really? He said, no, really. He didn't. He was like, he wasn't a slave to the exposure. He just wanted to shoot, and sometimes he was going way, way off the scale. But look at his work, But he knew what he was doing. He absolutely knew what he was doing. Another story he told us, Connie Hall. Now I'm getting into Connie Hall stories. What a lovely man. We had such good times with him. Another story he told about shooting Fat City. And he said at the time, all the exteriors, they're so bright and bleached out because he made a mistake and they had the wrong stock in the camera. But that wasn't true at all. That wasn't true at all. He only shot it on one stock. So, I mean, it's all this, it's a wonderful story, but he knew what he was doing. Exposure, you need to know exposure, especially when you were doing, when we were shooting film even more. But I think the whole concept of exposure range and latitude, and again, Conrad Hall shot a film called Tell 'em Willie Boy is Here, and it inspired me to do something with a negative that I hadn't done before. He Paul developed a negative, so he overexposed 2.5 stops and then underdeveloped the negative a stop. So it was still printing like in the high 50s, but which is a 1.5 stops overexposed or more. But he did that for this effect of the film. And if you watch Tell 'em Willie Boy Was Here, you can see why he did it. So if you don't know about exposure, if you don't, well, it was different, but if you don't know about chemistry, you don't know about, color science, then you're never going to do that kind of thing. You're never going to have that range of palette to play with,
Sorry, but to me, the idea of having the most latitude that you can, so in post, depending on what you're doing, you're able to get to the point where you want. And I have seen people that haven't been as careful on exposure, and trying to match that in to something else is really tough.
Absolutely, yeah.
So I would say learn exposure.
Oh, absolutely. But also, it was a really interesting, when I was first shooting documentaries, behind the scenes film, I shot some behind the scenes footage of Dougie Slocum, great cinematographer. He ended up shooting Indiana Jones and films, but he did Julia and millions of films earlier than that. He did a lot of the Ealing comedies. And anyway, he was shooting. He was renowned for never using a light meter. But it was really interesting because I think every shot he did, there was a brute arc, like 15 feet from the subject to the frame. So if it was, in this case, Linda Ronstadt standing, in front of the camera, he was shooting a mid shot. The brute arc would be, 15 or 20 feet back above the camera as a fill light. So he could go in front of the camera and hold his hand up and say 5.6 or whatever. It was usually 5.6. He liked shooting at 5.6. So that's what they did back then. And he'd say 5.6. But his meter, he didn't need a meter. He had a meter because it was the brute arc, because he knew that was 5.6. But it looked cool. You know, I used to obsess about exposures. And then I could do it without a meter because I'd kind of learned, you know. Then I didn't, as I said, I didn't want to be a slave to the meter. So I would just, I always would take one reading, or generally of a scene, and then I could judge after that. But
what about night shooting? How would you go about learning what works and what doesn't work in night shooting?
Yeah, night shooting's always difficult. I mean, it's less difficult now, again, with digital technology in a way, but when you only had, you know, 50 ASA or 100 ASA film stock, and you were doing a big night scene, it was always kind of tricky, because it's kind of fake, isn't it? It's kind of fake, the idea of moonlight. Because now you can actually shoot with moonlight, not everything, but a full moon, you could shoot with a full moon. But
it seems to me that a lot of times what bothers me in a night shot is if there isn't something that my eye can focus on, if there isn't like a little bit of light hitting something. I like very dark scenes, but when it's dark across and you're straining and you see nothing, even if you end up seeing something not inconsequential, but your eye has a place to go to.
I mean, the thing is, it's also not necessarily about creating total realism.
Yes.
I think there's a difference between, in a way, naturalism and realism. I mean, you go out on a moonlit night, that's not what you imagine it looks like. If you really study it, that's not what the audience necessarily expects to see in a film, or that's not necessarily what you actually want to show them, because you want to concentrate on a certain aspect and you want to, you know, create a certain mood. So, and the thing is with lighting, you're not always trying to completely represent reality. In fact, often far from it. But for me anyway, I want to create a reality.
Yeah.
I want to put the audience in a world that they believe, that appears like it behaves the way the real world does to their eyes. The light behaves the way it does in the real world. It's not something that suddenly that jumps out. There's suddenly two shadows from one sun, or you know, or there's multitude of color lights with no justification. I don't like that sort of world. I like to create a world that the audience can be immersed in and can believe it. But it's not necessarily the world that I see out here now. You know, that's the difference. And that's especially, I think, applies to night shooting. And it's very hard to recreate exactly what night looks like, because your eyes behave so differently in low light levels, and especially reflected sunlight, i.e. moonlight, which is reflected sunlight. A moon does not glow by itself, you know, and the color spectrum is pushed off to this green blue, but that's not really what's there. That's what your eyes are interpreting, you know. So it's a very interesting issue, really. What is real, and what is the way you want to create for the audience? What do you want to create for the audience? You know, I think it's a mistake in that sense to try and create something that's ultra realistic or ultra naturalistic to the world we actually see at night. I think you create your own version of it, really, how you interpret it. And like you were saying, I don't really like a frame where everything is kind of so dark. It might be realistic or naturalistic. It's muddy and dark, and that's what you would see if you were out there on a really black night with no moon and a cloudy night, sure. But do you want to show the audience that? I don't know, you know. So it's your interpretation of it that's important. But it's, that's the hardest issue. If you've got a light source, it's easy. And then I find, personally, one of my big conundrums is mixing light. You know, there was a couple of scenes in True Grit where we mix firelight with moonlight. and I felt I had to because I wanted to see more than what the fire could justify. But I was never happy with it. I never got it right.
Let's say you're shooting on a street, so you've got street lights and you've got other sources of light. What's the best way? And I also know that street lights have different colors, and it's good to know what does what. How would you suggest someone go and practice?
Well, it's interesting you say, well, I know the street lights have different colors and stuff. It was really interesting, I think, when I was at film school, there was a rule. You must match all your color sources. And you go, really? What are you talking about? And that came from, the days of Technicolor, and you had that's years and years before me, but you would have a Technicolor, technician on set. Everything had to match in, and so it's interesting. You watch the first color films, and they all are in a kind of white light. You rarely saw even a warm oil lamp. You would see a Western, and at night you would have an oil lamp, but it'd be still the same color as the sunlight of the scene previously. And then that slowly changed. That slowly changed with people like, Kurosawa's cinematographer Keizo Miyagawa, when he started shooting color on one end of the spectrum, and then certainly some of the American cinematographers that came along that had worked in documentary. If you take Alonso, who shot Chinatown, or somebody, those kind of guys came in and started messing with color. And then you go down the history of it, and you get to Robbie Muller, and you see what Robbie Muller did especially when he came to America and shot Paris, Texas for one, but then To Live and Die in LA. And he went on the streets, and those with such bold colors. Yeah, there were fluorescent tubes above the grocery store, and they were bright green. Oh my God. And they were next to ones that were bright blue. And then there was a street light that was sodium or mercury, and it was blue-green. And suddenly there was a whole range of colors that you realized there's a whole palette there that people hadn't been using, They'd been matching everything up. Obviously there were people before Robbie Muller that did it, but I very, very, very much remember seeing both Paris, Texas and Live and Die LA and going, oh, yeah, wow. And the blackness, the darkness that he had, these pools of light. Mm-hmm. I mean, there had been stills photographers doing that for quite some time previously, photographing gas stations at night out in Palmdale or wherever. So you got this inky blackness and this wonderful kind of like spaceship of a gas station in this middle of nowhere. And it's like, it was so inspiring that, it didn't have to look like, a John Ford Western, which were brilliantly photographed, don't get me wrong, but the interior was always lit like the exterior, and now and again you would get the iconic searches shot with a silhouette going out the door, sure, but when you were actually around the dinner table, it was all kind of light punched in, and it was all kind of white light. There's such a broad color palette now. Look at the still photographs of Todd Hilgo. He goes out on the streets at night here. I think he lives in LA, but he'd done a lot up in, with rural America. And look at his color photographs of just streets at night. And the way the light changes in the fog, the kind of golden sodium gloomy glow that went over a side of a suburban house of a different color, or the way it hit a door, or his night shots of regular streets. They're really brilliant because he's just photographing normal suburban America and giving it such a kind of interesting personal look, So there's a whole world out there to study and then to experiment with yourself, I love walking around streets at night, just looking at light. It's great, Can't do it now really so easily, but there you go.
I would think it would be also good to go out at night, take shots, and bring it back in some sort of photo editing program like Photoshop or something, and play with bringing something up in the frame or down, and just so you can see what the effect is, like bringing a light brighter. And
yeah, I think anytime you play with images, it's going to teach you something. Yeah, I mean, I'm really not a big one for
I know you're not
doing much after what I've photographed on the negative.
No, and I'm not saying
No.
to do this after. I'm saying as a way of learning.
A way of learning, yes.
To see what appeals to you.
Yeah, absolutely. It's just not to see what appeals to you. It's to see how different things affects you. You know, that's the thing. It's not just finding a technical solution. It's finding something that is more than just a superficial image. And that's kind of Todd Hilgo's work in a way, that there's something there. I mean, they're really interesting, very simple images, but there's something there that's more than just the image. You know, I don't know what I'm saying, but there is.
But that's why if you play around with even a practical light or something and you do it different ways and then look at that same setup with the lamp moved in different places, you can look and see what...
Exactly. I mean, simplistically put, it's like you put the bulb under someone's face, under somebody's chin, and what's that effect compared if you put it above their forehead? Yeah, and absolutely.
I think it's really good to learn how to light simply at this point, because when you get onto a set and suddenly it's do it now, you don't always have the time to do everything that you'd like to do. You've got to learn to be able to turn it over quicker.
Well, there's that, but I mean, you know me, I like simplicity, and not just because it's easier.
But that's also why you light fast. So
I like, you know, who was it said? It was James. I think it was James Wong Howe said towards the end of his career. I mean, he was in his 80s. He died shooting a film in his 80s. Funny Lady, I think it was. But he said towards the end of his career, he said, "I wish I had more time, because I used to light a set with, you know, 100 10Ks or whatever, you know, 100 lights. And now I've got it down to 10 or 11. He said, "I really want to get it down to 1." And I thought that was really telling, because I think that's just his way of putting it, but it's a way of, he was searching for simplicity. He was searching something, okay, again, it sounds pretentious, but he was searching for something that was more significant and pure, you know? And I think we're all guilty of starting to light and think, that's nice. Oh, well, I'll put a little kicker on here, a little backlight. Oh, then I can put a little card here, it'll bounce something in the eye. And then I'll do this. And you realize you've just destroyed it. It's become some piece of confectionery instead of something that's really simple and direct. And that's what I'm going back to looking at people's stills photographs and what you like. For me, the best stills photographs are kind of the ones that just strip away all the things that the photographer might see on the periphery of what is around them, and concentrate on that one little image that says more than you would if you showed it in a big wide shot with a lot of other things.
Yeah, it's the thing of don't overthink too. When you're trying to light something and you start adding this and adding this, and then you lose your way in a way. Yeah. And you have to take everything off and start again.
Yeah. I think it was Dick Bush told me that once. He was lighting somebody in a phone box, and he had like 20 lamps and flags all around the phone box. And then the AD called for the actor, and there's no way the actor could get in the phone box. But it was kind of funny. But it's true. I mean, that was his thought, that you can just kind of overthink it and then destroy what instinctively you had thought of doing in the first place.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
And it's very easy when you're on set and you're nervous to kind of get tied up. And I've only done it a few times, thankfully. But there was a particular time on Hudsucker when I designed a rig for this night scene in this boardroom, and Billy had rigged it, a gaffer, and it was nice, but it wasn't quite right. And I kept trying to mess with it to get it right. And, I'd been there all morning, and I got to the point I was just, it was all right, but it wasn't what I really wanted. And I knew if I'd shot it, I'd been really unhappy. So I went to Joel and Ethan, who were sitting in like green room or whatever, waiting. And I remember saying, "Oh, so what's taking so long?" And I said, "Well, I'm not happy." I said, "But can we break for lunch early?" I said, "I promise I'll be ready to shoot when you come back from lunch." They said, "What?" I said, yeah, I don't like it. What I've done, it's a screw up. But I know what I want to do." And they said, "Yeah, sure. Don't worry about it. It's all right." It never happened before. It was like, that was so cool. And so we broke for lunch, and Billy and a couple of guys and I worked at lunch. We ripped it all down, put up 3 China balls, and we were ready to shoot after lunch. And it's like, that was so telling that, at some point you've got to stop. At some point you've got to say, okay, it's not working, start again. It doesn't often happen, but it's better to do that, I think, if you can, than just struggle to try and make something work when it was your initial decision that was wrong. Mm-hmm. Everything else, like Dick's flags and all his lights around the phone box, were only there because his initial decision was wrong. That's what he was saying.
Yeah, and just start all over again.
Yeah, just admit that's not the right place to put it, do something else.
One thing that you mentioned in the part where I didn't hit record, so maybe we should go back and do this, is about shooting faces.
Yeah, when I was at art college, and then I sort of discovered stills photography. I wasn't there as a stills photographer, but I was there. I'd been put in a graphic design course, but thankfully there was a dark room, and I spent most of my time taking photographs. And now and again we would get Hugh to come in for a week or so. And one fashion photographer said, and I've always remembered this, he said, if you can photograph a human face, you can photograph anything. And I thought that was really telling, and it's true, because it's not only in a technical sense, like we're saying with a bare bulb. Do you put it under somebody's face, above their face? Do you put it behind them and then bounce the light into their face? But it's not just technical, it's how do you bring out that character? How do you bring out, again, pretentious, the essence of who that person is? And that's what the great portrait photographers can do. And I think anything, like a big set, it's basically just the same as lighting a human face, but a lot bigger. I mean, it's just because it's bigger doesn't necessarily make it harder, because I think lighting a human face to express something to an audience is the hardest thing to do, actually. I think it is, yeah.
So that's a good thing to practice too.
Absolutely. But I mean, like, if you're interested in working in film, if you don't have the human face, you don't have a lot. You can have a film about climate change, sure, great, or Armageddon, great. Well, they're all quite topical right now. But you don't have films are mostly about characters. Mm. They're mostly about a human face 20 foot up on a screen, aren't they?
The one thing that I do want to go back to, because I disagree with you, I don't know, but the importance of exposure, I really think it is important. Coming from the post side and seeing stuff come in and post houses saying, well, a lot of people really don't know how to expose, and we have to work so hard to make it work. And I know there's a lot of latitude, but get it right the first time.
I totally agree with you on that side of it, of getting the exposure right. I mean, I think people are really sloppy now, and you can see it. You can see that one shot will be really grainy and it look like a dupe, even though it's digital. And another one, the color is shift, and it's a nightmare. And you and I know it. We've had certain problems matching things in.
With other footage.
Yeah. But I think the key thing about exposure is thinking about the range and knowing without spending hours on a film set going around with a light meter, knowing what that's going to look like.
Right. And
Even if you haven't got a digital calibrated monitor on set, feeling confident that that part of the room is going to drop off to black, or it's going to have a little detail, and that hotspot over there is not going to go sort of nuclear, that it's no good. That's something you need to know by eye and taking a reading where you want to put the actual exposure, where your base stop is, and then seeing how things fall off on the frame to that base stop. You take a meter to take the base stop, but the idea of going around the set and taking a reading of every little, dark, light, and every variation is just that way. Then the technology's kind of ruling you, really. Then you know what I mean. You're kind of a slave to technology.
Well, I think also to get the eye for exposure is if you go out with a stills camera and you shoot the same thing at different stops and see what happens.
Yeah, there's no way around it. You've got to practice and learn and learn with a stills camera. Yeah, learn with it. Yeah, absolutely.
So basically what we've been saying, going back to the original question, is how do you learn lighting is practice. Go out.
Well,
you don't need a large lighting package to learn at all.
No.
You don't even need a large lighting package to create a good effect, a good shot.
No, you don't. No. I mean, I've shot films like Sid and Nancy where hardly used a film light on the whole film. And I say, look how Robbie Muller shot a lot of films. Yeah, a lot of little practicals and fluorescence, and it depends on the film, obviously. But then I think it is good to understand what different kinds of lights do. That's something else. It's really important to understand that a Brute Arc or a Dino 24 light Dino is going to give you a different effect than a 5K with Fresnel without the lens on it. You need to know that. What does a Skypan do? You need to know all these. You don't need to know it, but it's good to know it, because then when you're in a situation and you want a certain kind of look, like when we were doing Blade Runner and I wanted those hard moving shadows. Well, I knew I'd done it before, years and previously. I'd done it with a Skypan. It's basically a bare bulb, but a Skypan is so light. It's something you could rig on a cable and you could maneuver it up and down. You couldn't have done that with a 20K, which there was a 20K bulb, but you couldn't have done it with a 20K lamp because you got this huge lamp and you couldn't focus it. But if you have a bare bulb, it's going to go over the whole set in an even light. You have to know these things to have the opportunity to use it.
So it's important to know what's out there, equipment-wise, just to know what your choices are.
Absolutely. You look at the new LEDs.
And I would think it's even more important if you're doing smaller features because you don't have a big package. So figure out what's out there, and I could use this way, but I could also use it this way.
Yeah, it's also important, I think, to go down to Home Depot. I mean, seriously, just look at the bulbs that are available. Look at what you can get. Just buy a few bulbs.
Well, right.
Put them together. I mean, that's what I did when I was first shooting low budget. I used to shoot rock and roll or independent cinema shorts and stuff.
And you still make up rigs. And I remember when we were in Budapest doing Blade Runner, trying to send your bulbs over from Santa Monica.
Yeah, we had to get bulbs. I even got some bulbs from Australia, remember? From Sean in Australia, because we had some bulbs on Unbroken. We'd used them. They're a very old-fashioned, clear 1K bulb that you couldn't really get anymore. There's just a few stockpiles here and there. And I'd taken some to Australia and left them there with Sean, and he sent them to us in Budapest, remember?
So when you go to Home Depot getting stuff for the house, do you go through the bulbs all the time? Since I don't go with you, I'm just curious.
I do, actually, yeah. I look and see what's changed. I mean, it's frustrating now because I like incandescent household bulbs, and, that's all sort of dying out now. The energy-saving bulbs, sure they're good for the planet, but they're not so good for lighting. There's a bit of a conundrum there, really. I'd especially like looking at the little quartz bulb and see what's still available and stuff. And there's still a lighting company in New York that has a stockpile of lots of old bulbs that you can usually get things that you want from different kinds, yeah.
So basically, to sum it up, what you're saying is, in order to learn lighting, go out and use your eye first to see what's around you and take pictures, and then try and create little images yourself.
Yeah,
and see what happens.
Absolutely. You're not going to learn from me or anybody else. And if it doesn't excite you, if going around with a camera and looking at light in the real world doesn't excite you, then I don't think there's much hope, really. That's how you learn,
All right. Well, thank you very much. Thanks for listening. If you want more information and further discussion, check out the forums at rogerdeakins.com. Becoming a member is free, and you can ask follow-up questions there. And be sure to subscribe to the podcast for more new questions and topics. Also, check us out on Instagram at team.deakins. See you next time.